So this happened in the 90s in Miami during the Christmas holiday break when I was about 7 to 8 years old. A tiny bit of personal backstory. My great-grandmother's second husband ended up sexually abusing his grandkids, who happened to be my aunts and my father for over a decade, but it was never discovered or spoken about until after he had passed away, and was about the same time that I was born. So thankfully, I never met him. But as we all know, that kind of abuse can seriously alter your view of the world around you. In this case, it made my family hyper-vigilant about protecting me, and I wasn't allowed to be outside alone or sleep over anyone's house ever. Okay, now back to the story. Since I was born, Nana had always lived with us. Before I was school-aged, I stayed home with her during the day, and once I began school, she would watch me whenever we had summer or holiday breaks. I loved her. She was a southern red-haired firecracker who took no shit from anyone, but had the biggest soft spot for me. So this winter break, I had just gotten my rollerblades and was going up and down the paved walkway practicing. My Nana was on the porch reading and watching me. And then the house phone rang. She debated having me come inside while she went to answer it. Cordless phones wasn't really a thing yet, but I pleaded to stay as I was finally getting the hang of it. So, she reluctantly agreed and went inside to answer it, but she left the main door open so that she could still see me through the screen door. It took a few minutes for her to return, but during that time, nothing happened, so I think she was more at ease. She returned to her book, and I now was working on learning a few tricks. After maybe another half hour or so, she said it was time for lunch and we had to go inside. I begged her to let me play just a bit longer and promised when she finished preparing lunch, I would come inside, no questions asked. She stood there watching me for a bit, but then agreed and again went inside, leaving the screen door open, and told me to sing while I skated so she could hear me. I gladly belted our in-sync digital get-down as I practiced. Moments later, maybe 2 or 3, a white van came down the street very slowly. They seemed lost, but I didn't pay it much mind because I was a kid unaware of the evils of the world. Plus, I was on the other side of the chain-linked fence, so I was basically safe. Even when it rolled up and stopped right in front of the house, I kept on skating. It wasn't until the passenger door opened and an extremely tall man stepped out and asked me which was the highway. At this point, I was nervous, but I held out to the gate for stability and pointed in the direction. He made some small chat that I can't really recall, but it was along the likes of, "How was my Christmas? What did Santa bring me?" and many more. And then he asked if I wanted to have the toys that his daughter didn't want, like a Barbie house. I was still silent because now I was scared. The way he looked at me was dark. He was smiling, but his eyes seemed both joyful and vicious, and it still unnerves me to this day. He slowly came closer to the gate and asked if I wanted to check out the toy. This is exactly what they taught about stranger danger in school and in home. And so I shook my head and began to skate backwards towards the door, not wanting to take my eyes off of him, but also not wanting to yell or run, because I didn't want to be rude, if he was just a really nice guy. He came closer to the point where he was only a few feet away from the gate and asked if my parents were home. Now, all thoughts of politeness vanished and I panicked. I yelled for my Nana and tried to run inside, which landed me promptly on my back, and I smacked the back of my head against the concrete. At the exact same moment, he unlatched the gate to come inside, and before he could get to me, my Nana came bursting through the door with a cast iron skillet in hand, cursing. He looks up, sees her, and then bolts. He hopped back in the van, and before the door could close properly, the driver was speeding down the street. My nana bypassed me completely and ran after the van screaming at them. And I later learned trying to get their tag, but there wasn't one. She picked me up and carried me inside and called the police and my dad while she asked what happened. 10 minutes later, I'm with the paramedics getting my scraped elbows patched up while my nana spoke with the police. My dad showed up soon after, and I didn't go outside the rest of that break. Years later, in my late teens, it came up one Christmas in conversation, and I got more of the story. Turns out, my nana was on edge more than normal because there had been a man who had broken into a woman's apartment in Broward. It was a city over, and been assaulted just before Christmas, and still on the loose. The description my nana and I both gave the police matched the rapist. Bald spot, bright blue eyes, and a well over 6 foot tall. We don't know if they ever caught him, or them, since I'm sure whoever was driving the van was 100% down with whatever evil plan that man had for me. But thank God for my nana. Rest in peace, nana. And creepy guy asking a child for directions? Let's not meet.
I love a good creepy ghost story, and always have one memory that comes to mind when I listen to r/let's not meet stories. Problem is, it always seemed very tame, but some part of me clearly wants to share it badly enough that it dredges this memory back up without fail. So I thought I'd go ahead and give it what it wants. I was about 13 at the time, living in a middle-class suburb with a decent reputation, despite increasing drug activity and breaking and entering reports over the last several years. It had always seemed like a strangely quiet place to me, but I didn't have many friends and was growing up in a neglectful environment, so I can see in retrospect how I might have to come to feel this way. I would ride my bike around for hours, seeing very few people outside their homes, and this led to an overwhelming sense that while outside, I was both completely alone and always being watched. One year, I somehow managed to befriend another kid in the neighborhood who lived just a couple of streets over from me, and we'd travel back and forth from each other's houses almost every day. It was nice to have someone to be with. It made me feel less vulnerable, I guess. Plus, she was a few years older than me, which was a bonus. We decided to hang out after school like we did every day, and just cruise around with nothing better to do. Me on a razor scooter, and her on a bike. Constantly teetering between all-out races and chiller conversation, heavy spells. Oh, another important bit of information is that by this point, I'd already been diagnosed with severe generalized anxiety and had learned through my stellar home life not to ever trust my gut. We were making our way back up a hill for the third or fourth time when a white, windowless van, I know, biggest cliche, pulled out of a driveway several houses behind us. Obviously, we thought nothing of it. It was a large neighborhood. Even if there weren't loads of people outside, there were still cars traveling constantly in and out. Admittedly, being young, dumb teenagers, we were totally hogging the street, and didn't even realize until noticing that the van was driving quite slowly behind us. I remember calling for my friend to move to the curb so this guy could go around us, and she did. But the creepmobile didn't change, of course. It stayed several yards behind us, crawling along at the same pace as we were. This is when that sinking anxiety feeling started to kick in for me. But I was quick to remind myself that my brain was broken, so odds are nothing was actually wrong. Besides, my friend didn't say anything about it, so it must have been fine. I mean, she had stopped talking all of a sudden, after hours of us yammering on. But it was probably nothing. Thankfully, we were about to round the corner to the street her house was on, so that gave me enough optimism to push the fear as far down as I could. After all, the van didn't turn. We both looked behind us to see, and half embarrassedly smiled at one another for being worried about something stupid. Still, I couldn't help myself, and stole another glance over my shoulder. That was when I saw the van had gone into a driveway. It was now backing out of it, turning to follow us down this new street. We must have come from my house, because I specifically remember thinking that where we had to get back to, even as we neared her own. At this point, with the van still creeping along behind us, and no one else in sight, we'd both started to panic. It's okay, I thought. At least we're together. Safety in numbers and all that. That, of course, was when I looked over to see my friend pedaling furiously forward, towards her own house. I must have called for her again, and gotten waved off because my composure I'd managed to hold on to completely disappeared by now, and I bolted down the street as fast as my scooter could carry me, knowing that the end sloped downward, and would help me speed away at least. The next bit happened too fast to completely remember, but long story short, I was so busy looking behind me as I raced down that hill that I came about a foot away from hitting a car. And whoever was driving that van must have seen the other car, or something, because the next time I turned back, they were long gone. The car in front of me drove off, somewhat irritated, and I ran full speed back to my house, throwing my scooter down as soon as I hit the driveway and racing inside. I don't think I said anything afterwards. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid.
This is going to take a while to explain everything, so please stay with me. It all comes around. My very first car was a dark green 2000 Volkswagen Jetta. It was the most basic of basics when it came to cars. No options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300, slow, dumpy, no right headlight, and drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways and let a cloud of white smoke when started. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car that you can think of, my car was no exception. Despite it being a piece of German crap, I loved that car. I drove it every chance that I had, and I don't think a day went by that I didn't drive it. I named it Thunder Bunny. She was my baby, my beautiful green baby. But the Volkswagen from that generation, Jettas especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure what exactly causes it, but essentially, the transmissions gradually get worse and worse until the car will not shift into third gear. And there's not a thing you can do from there. So, a couple of weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going about 30 when the engine suddenly roared and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have hope for my baby. She was gone already. And so much to my dismay, we started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find her. A dark green 1999 Volkswagen Jetta, exactly like my old car, but absolutely everything. She was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, auto sunroof, everything. All except for an automatic transmission. I knew how to drive manual, so it was perfect. And I had a new baby, from the crackhead neighborhood girl to a Scarlett Johansson, at least in my eyes. And I loved that car even harder. Named it Little Boy, and I was happy. Okay, I'm about to get to the story, but I have a few more quick things to explain. You can skip this if you want. It's important, but not vital to the story. First is for people that might not know, but when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, the car will stall, which is bad. So if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off, or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake, or it will roll away. Guess what the only really broken thing on my car was at that point when the story takes place? If you guessed the handbrake, you're right. And that was the second thing. No handbrake. Okay, now to the story. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller, growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but every once in a while, I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place, and I've had a few shotguns pulled on me. One night, about 2 months ago, I was on delivery on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little slow. So when a delivery came in at 8:30, a half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized it was 7.1 miles away, so all of the closing jobs would be done by the time I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood-surrounded neighborhood, but again, no work when I got back to the store. Seemed like a good deal to me. And I'm all about those sort of deals. And so I climbed into my car and went to drive 7 miles away. As I pulled up into the house, I began to get a bad feeling. The house was in a small trailer park type neighborhood next to a lake, the kind that the houses are all a good distance apart with a likely drug problem, and was completely dark. No lights inside, none outside. There was a single car in the driveway and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off. By the house being completely dark, I mean there wasn't so much as a nightlight that I could see. Usually when I deliver to a dark house, there's at least a light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake, waiting for their pizza. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, grabbed the small, cheapest pizza we had, and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing, and I could barely see the house, and the only light was the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and past the big open window to the front door, and as I reached the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I've ever seen, I said aloud, "Oh, fuck that!" And I hurried back to my car. I'm a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm a frail thing and can hardly fight off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and almost simultaneously, the living room light behind the big open window lit up, and a single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cussed to myself and weighed my options. If I went up to the door, I could die. If I noped out of there, I would 110% be fired. That meant no new car part, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, and just sitting at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened my door, making a choice I'm damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out, mostly so my engine would still be running so that if I needed, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked to the door where the man had opened it the rest of the way, and as I got closer, I got a good look at him. I'm not one to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was cleanly shaven and was covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of gray jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face and was staring me dead in his eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he started to reach around his waist. I stopped. He was staring at me with the most evil grin I have ever seen, and I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes. I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what happened, and my work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body was never found. And my dad would regret telling me he was happy for me landing this job. Oh God, save thee! But that's when I heard it. The distinct sound of gravel under tires. My only pathetically small chance of escape was rolling away, and I didn't even look back at the car to know that. I stared at the man, and I was about to say, "Fuck you," when he looked back to my car. I heard the sound of a car rolling, it was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me, and I finally looked over my shoulder. My car had rolled backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who had a nervous look. He looked back at me and scowled again and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. I gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I looked back at the house, and the man was standing in front of the window, staring out at me. You better believe that I nearly spun the tires on my way out there, and I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under streetlights. It was easily the scariest moment I've ever had, and as soon as I got back to the store, I told my boss about it. We called the police. We never heard anything about it. I assumed they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza. I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags. Only recently I realized this is a sort of butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out, and I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transmission. But if that transmission was still working, then I would have still had the car when this happened. I would have put the car in park, and it would have sat there while whatever would have happened to me happened. I have zero doubts in my mind that that man was planning on murdering me. So, shitty German engineering saved me from getting murdered. I have a lot of scary things that happened in my life, probably more than my fair share. By the way, this is my first Reddit post, so I'm sorry if it sucks. When I was a child, I was nearly kidnapped 3 separate times. I only remember one of them, but my family has 2 other times that they say happened, which I will briefly go over. One of these times was at a barrel racing competition in Camp Verde, Arizona. A lady picked me up as an infant and tried to run away with me, but my dad chased her and she put me down. Another time, someone else tried to break into our car when my mom left me inside for a moment just to drop the mail at the post office. Apparently, even as a little kid, I had the presence of mind to honk the horn until she came out and the guy left. Again, I don't remember these specific instances, and you know as much as I do now. The one time I do remember, I was a little bit older and my brother and his best friend were there too. My mom owned a restaurant and we would go to Costco to buy tons of wholesale food in one stop. And she would bring us along mostly because she didn't want to pay for a babysitter, but also because we were cheap labor and would load and unload the car in exchange for chicken fingers or some Costco pizza. This time, my brother, his friend, and I opted to get paid up front and had Costco pizza while my mom went around the store and got everything on her list. We ate our food, and before we went to look for our mom, we went into the bathroom. There were 3 stalls, and my brother and his friend were on either side with me in between them. I think I was singing while I sat on the toilet and didn't notice when someone else came in. I don't remember much about what he looked like, other than he had a denim jacket, and I think he had a skinny, clean-shaven face. I know this much because he looked under the stall door right at me. I was scared and stopped making noise, and my brother asked if I was okay. The guy stopped looking at me and disappeared. Nothing happened for a minute, and then suddenly, the man's arms reached under and grabbed my pants, which were around my ankles. He tried to drag me out under the door, but I screamed, and I put my hands under both sides of the stall, and my brother and his friend grabbed them and held on to me. I think my brother yelled at the guy, and we were all screaming, and they kept pulling me until the guy let go and we heard him run out of the bathroom. We tried to run out and get a look at him, but he was gone. When we told my mom, she went to the Costco people to see if they had surveillance tapes. But they said the police needed to be involved and warrants and stuff needed to be gotten. So we ended up just going home. It was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me, and I think it still affects me today. I sleep with my bedroom door locked, and I have nightmares about home intruders pretty often. This happened at Costco in Flagstaff, Arizona, probably somewhere between 1999 and 2001. And I've always wondered if something else like it has ever happened in that area, or if someone was ever caught for kidnapping in that area around that time. I was hoping putting this on Reddit might stir something up, but if it doesn't though, that's okay. I just hope we never meet again. Hi, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you want to send me a story to read, feel free to do so. My email is in the description of the video. And if you want to follow me on my social media, just to get updates or maybe to talk, the links and info for my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts are also in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn that bell on to be notified for upcoming surprises. And remember, your fear feeds me.